Join us today as we dive into Dapr, or the Distributed Application Runtime, to see just how easy it is to get up and running with microservice development. Today, we're going to be talking about Dapr, or the Distributed Application Runtime. I'm joined by Paul, who's going to walk us through a little bit about these microservice building blocks that developers can use to start with microservice development. Paul, can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Hey, Aaron. Thanks for having me. Let's talk about the Dapr project. Dapr is an open source project. It's actually a CNCF incubation project. It's been out for a few years now, and it's really, like you said, it's focused on making microservice and distributed app developers more productive. The way that it does that, it uses APIs and tools. So really think developer APIs. And those APIs provide a set of building blocks. So think about you have different jobs to do, whether it's PubSub or calling other microservices synchronously or asynchronously, or working with secrets or state management. Those are the kinds of scenarios you can do really easily with the APIs. And one thing that I love to point out too is Dapr builds in best practices. So you're not just doing service communication, but you do it securely. You do it in a way that's resilient. And that's built in. That's not a lot of code that you have to write. I'd be glad to show you some of that if you're interested.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see a demo and kind of how you can get started with
Okay,
Dapr.
Perfect. So I'm here on Dapr.io, and that's just a good place to start. If we pop into the docs, just so that everybody can kind of see it, we talked about a set of building blocks. Let me just zoom in here. So we actually have, we're kind of building quite a set of these now. We have some around service communication, so that's service invoke, that's PubSub, where you can publish and subscribe to async messages, the state management. But then you also see we have things like actors, if you want to do stateful programming. We actually just added workflow. I'll talk about that in a bit. Even things like distributed locks, right? So when you're doing work and you're thinking about concurrency, like we help you with those kinds of problems. When I say we, it's really the Dapr community that helps you with that. So let's pop more into a demo. So here, I have my terminal open, and let's just kind of take a lap around this. So I have the Dapr Quick Starts repo. I've cloned that, and let's pop it open in VS Code. How about we start with PubSub? I think that's a place that a lot of people start. You can see, just as I'm flying through here, a number of the programming languages you'd want to use are supported by Dapr. I didn't even mention this, but Dapr, the way it works is there's actually a runtime sidecar. And the sidecar exposes these APIs that developers can use. It exposes it over either HTTP or gRPC. So that provides kind of like any programming language could call it, even on the local host. But then we have a number of SDKs. So you're seeing here .NET C#, Go, Java, JavaScript, Python, all can call. So it's, when Dapr was being created, the maintainers really wanted Dapr to run everywhere, run with every kind of programming model, programming language that people are used to. So I think that's also one of the hidden superpowers of Dapr. Anyway, how about we just show JavaScript?
Yeah,
I think
sounds great.
It's as good as any place to start. So here I have a quick start that's about PubSub. Actually, we'll flash back here. So I have a picture of it. I'm a visual dude. So here's a picture of what we're going to show. We have two microservices, checkout and order. And we're basically going to communicate in a PubSub fashion where we're sending messages asynchronously. And we're going to do that through a PubSub broker. In this case, it's with Redis Cache. Really, we could use all kinds of brokers. If you prefer RabbitMQ, if you prefer Kafka, if you prefer your cloud vendor service, you could use any of those with Dapr. And the thing that's kind of arbitrating between these brokers is the Dapr sidecar. So you can see there's a sidecar next to my first microservice checkout. There's another one inbound to order processor. And we don't have to think about the mechanics of that. That's actually how Dapr is going to make it really seamless to work between the different runtimes, the different microservices. That's also where some of those best practices kick in. The runtime is going to do that heavy lifting for us. All right, so let's go back to code. So here we saw the picture. The literal representation of that, I have a checkout folder, I have an order processor folder. Inside is kind of what you'd expect, index.js. This is our client. And really, it kind of comes down to you're writing these very simple lines of code. Like I take the SDK, which is called client, and I say pubsub.publish. I pass in my topics, and I pass in the POJO or POCO object, and it just automatically gets serialized and is sent.
So in just one line of code, we now have the entire publishing side of our PubSub.
The entire publish side. It's like, Dapr gives you cloud events and the cloud event schema wrapped over it. You'll get like at least once guarantees. So that one-liner is doing a lot of work, right? Which is pretty cool. And that's code that we all had to write, and Dapr kind of makes you more productive. So that's the publisher side. Now let's look at the subscriber side. Just as easy, one-liner, server.pubsub.subscribe, and that's going to point to any function you want, any code-based function. In this case, it's kind of one of those dynamic Lambda functions, and all it's going to do is just write the message out.
Cool.
Right. And then, so let's go ahead and run this, and I'm going to pop to a terminal just for this. So let's start the order processor so that we can subscribe and receive. What I'm going to do, Aaron, is I'm going to do a Dapr run. So I mentioned there's APIs and tools. Dapr has a CLI, Dapr.
Yep.
And the CLI helps, as a developer, you can start your application with the Dapr sidecar simply by saying Dapr run.
Gotcha.
And then there's a number of arguments you can choose to set. Like I like to set an app ID, so we're saying this microservice has this kind of universal name on my machine, and that's when I do service discovery, I'm just going to refer to that name. Right, and then I can set up components, like by default, we're using Redis, but what if I wanted to use Kafka? I can point to a different component spec.
Yep, makes sense. And did I have to do anything to get Redis up and running, or?
That's a really good question. So the Dapr CLI is opinionated and makes it really easy. Like, hey, every API should kind of work by default on your local machine. So what Dapr did, I'm going to do a Docker PS. Even though we don't need to write Dockerized, containerized applications, the CLI does make use of Docker if it's there.
Yep.
As you can see, it's kind of wrapping in an unfortunate way. Actually, let's do it here. There we go. It's a little better. So you can see that there's a Redis container. So if I want to use Redis as a state store or as Redis streams for PubSub, it's already on the machine.
Cool.
Same thing, like observability, it's already there. If I want to do actors, a placement service is already there.
Gotcha. So when I initialize Dapr, it knows that just to make things easy, here's Redis, here's Zipkin, here's everything.
Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's something I'm really happy about, and I'd love to see that in more tools, honestly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. I can't tell you how many times I initialize and I'm missing a list of prerequisites.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So we'll go to the order processor. And so remember, we're going to do a Dapr run, and then whatever your normal runtime run is. So it's node, so it's npm run start.
Gotcha.
Right. Yep. All right, so let's run these in the terminal. So we'll start the order processor. In the README, I have the piece to copy and paste. So again, we're doing a Dapr run. We're going to name the app order processor, start on the port, and then do the npm run start.
Cool, and it looks like it's printing out both the logs from the Dapr sidecar as well as the app to make it super easy.
Yes.
Cool.
Blue. Pay attention to blue for the app.
Perfect.
That's my rule of thumb. All right, now we're going to go to checkout, and we're going to grab the checkout and run line. Okay, notice the app ID changed here.
Yep.
All right, perfect. What we're doing, so we're publishing that data. We sent in the POJO, but it actually serializes into JSON. It's getting sent over the wire, and we're getting all those extra features too, like at least once, security, resiliency, and all those things. So
awesome.
That was it. Kind of showed. That's pretty much my hello world of Dapr.
Yeah, makes sense. And then when users want to get ready to now move from like on their local machine using Redis to say into Azure or AWS or any cloud, like what does it take to swap out that component to something else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one thing I didn't really speak to it, but notice that we have this components folder that I'm passing into Dapr run. So what I would do is I would set up a components folder, and you can see I have one right here. There's this PubSub YAML.
Gotcha.
We love YAML, right?
Yep.
So there's a PubSub YAML. Right now it's configured to work with PubSub Redis, but there's a whole number of PubSub providers and brokers that are available with Dapr. So I would just pick a different one. And when you go to the Dapr docs, you'll see that there's a pretty lengthy reference. and see these component specs. So I would just go into here, pub sub brokers, and look at this list, like a whole set of brokers I could use.
Cool. And so I just swap out a YAML file, and then Dapr takes care of everything. I don't have to change any code at all.
That's it. It's just one piece of config.
That's amazing.
Yeah, the code is completely the same. I think, so when we talk about portability, your code being portability, that's really what we mean. Like the same code can run in all these different environments and really bind to the different brokers, the different state stores.
Wow, that's amazing. They really bring that multi-cloud support to my applications.
Yes, it brings multi-cloud. Even for me, it helps with the lifecycle. I'm doing something on my local machine. I send it maybe to a pre-prod environment. I don't want to spend a lot of money pre-prod. And then when it goes to prod, we might actually elevate the resources that it's using. So you can follow that lifecycle with the same app.
Cool.
Yeah.
Now, I heard the other day that Dapr version 1.10 is the most recent came out. What are some of the latest and greatest features of Dapr? What's new and exciting?
Let me pop over to that. A few highlights. There's the blog you should go check out. I'll go in a little bit of a weird order, but we were just talking about pub sub. So now you can actually send bulk messages or do some batching, which is really handy, and at scale that's important. Also, there's something called pluggable components. So what that means is that Dapr users, companies, the ecosystem can actually provide new plugins effectively, new components that don't exist in the Dapr source code, and you can add those as extensibility without having to rebuild Dapr from source.
Oh, very cool. So like you were saying earlier, or today you can just swap out those components for pub sub. If I have some older on-premises or custom code doing some pub sub, I just drop in that custom component and my code still remains
and that's
unchanged.
a great example. I hear that a lot. There's backends and data stores that maybe aren't in Dapr yet, but it's, you're one component wrapper away from having it in Dapr.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I can see it going further, hopefully in the fullness of time you could bring in a middleware this way and just plug in more. So that's neat. So a plugin is kind of like a special case of a component now, right? Another one that's really good, you saw me do the Dapr run. I had to be really careful that I did it right in the right terminal with all the right flags. That gets better. Now we have this multi-app run, and you can basically, inside of your microservices folders, just say Dapr run-f and point to a file, and that file will run multiple services with all their parameters.
Gotcha. So it's like what Docker Compose is to containers. This is like what it is for Dapr microservices.
That's a great way to think about it.
Perfect.
So it just simplifies and brings a number of things together. And we've gotten a lot of feedback that running and debugging Dapr can be a bit tricky. So I think this contribution was about making that whole phase better.
Cool.
And the last one, this is what I'm most excited that got contributed to the Dapr project, is Dapr Workflow. And so, workflow is really, I think we all kind of know a little bit about what workflow is conceptually, but it really helps with stateful programming, right? So whether it's a sequential workflow where this needs to happen, then this needs to happen, this needs to happen. But it also gets into more sophisticated things like, hey, if I'm going to do an aggregate, I want to do I guess technically it'd be called like a fan out and a fan in. I want microservices to go do some work in parallel, all report back, and then when all of those are done, execute a final result. So we can do that kind of stateful programming, which is really neat. And there is state to a workflow, and Dapr has a big element of resiliency. So even this entire workflow can go down, and then can be rehydrated with the same state and kind of pick up where it left off. So it's actually really powerful and really resilient.
Gotcha. So,
even in the face of being stateful.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So it's like, I use a lot of like if this then that, or logic apps, or all of that. So this sounds like I can have all of that like workflow with fans out and fan in, and just leverage the Dapr building blocks.
It had
along the way.
some convenient programming patterns over that, and I'll be able to show you that in a second. But yeah, it's if you're doing a lot of if then, if this, then that, if you're awaiting things, right? Or in parallel, it kind of helps you do that, and it does it in a code-focused way. Yep.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to take a look if you have an example of that.
So let's pop over to that too.
Yeah.
All right, so now I'm going to go look at workflow. We can close everything. And all right, so we'll pop into, we made a quick start for this too. When I say we on this one, I'm actually a maintainer of Quick Start, so
cool.
I actually did work on this
Perfect.
one. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so here, here's the workflows Quick Start. At first, it's in C#, and more languages are coming. So a couple things to look at. There's kind of like, the whole host that can start a workflow. And then the star of this is really this workflow file. And you talked about kind of the if this, then that. There's these different activities that get called. So let's think about an order processing. There's the first activity when an order comes through. There's then seeing if there's enough inventory, and then there's doing the commerce side of it, and then there's wrapping up. So you can see this is, very concise code, and all of it taking advantage of being asynchronous. I'm going to wait for this activity to happen, then I'm going to wait for this one. So this really sets up that sequential pattern. And if I wanted to do the fan in, fan out, I can actually start using things like await all.
Oh, very cool.
I can have a few activities and then say await all, and then we'll wait for those parallel ones to be done. So it's just making that async stateful programming a lot easier.
Cool.
And then, the activities are simple as well. So those are all defined in this folder. And you can see it could be incredibly simple logic or it could be complex logic. Kind of, it's up to you. And that's the interesting thing about workflow. You can wait for a little bit. You can wait for a very long time, days. Let's say there's an approval. You can wait forever, right? So workflow is kind of set up for that. You've done a lot of programming, so HTTP and gRPC. You're fighting timeouts and all this other stuff.
And so this builds on top of the entire ecosystem of Dapr building blocks and components and really stitches them together. In a really
it does stitch them together. So this is in Dapr, using Dapr. It's actually extensible, so we can actually, use the same code with a number of workflow engines, which is kind of neat. And then all the other Dapr features are in play, like observability, the security, all the other bindings. Let's say another example is I want to trigger a workflow based on some event coming in, or even like a Twilio, message coming in. You can totally do that. So use those features of Dapr together with a workflow, kick it off.
Very cool.
Yeah.
No, that's great to hear.
Yeah. Oh, let's run it. This is one of my favorite parts.
Cool. Yeah, let's take a look.
Let's not kill a bunch of processes. All right. I'm going to go and grab the README. It's my history is not my friend today in the terminal. I don't know why. Okay. All right. That's a little better. All right, so very simple, Dapr run, app-id.net run. And the workflow engine will kick off, and the workflow engine is actually a part of Dapr now, right? And you can see, remember, pay attention to the blue. So the blue, it's asynchronously doing each of the activities. It's checking for inventory, it's checking the cost, it's doing the commerce, and then it settles, right? So even though it's transactional, it's all happening. That's okay, but it's pretty noisy, right? It's a little bit hard to see. So this is my favorite view. And this is what I wanted to end off on. So Dapr, as I've mentioned, has observability built in. So meaning like monitoring, logging, even distributed tracing, all thanks to things like OpenTelemetry and Zipkin. Right? So you saw we had a Zipkin container. Already wired up to this thing.
And that just started automatically by Dapr Init?
Just by Dapr Init.
Amazing.
And so I can see these workflow requests that we're running. I can just pop into a distributed trace here, and I can now visualize each and every activity, how long they were, if any of them had a failure. I can understand the order in which things happened, so I get full observability over the workflow. And I think this really helps understand what's going on with the workflow now.
And so how much configuration or code did users have to do?
That was it. It was 0.
Oh, 0. So
yeah, so it's just by default. When you use Dapr, all service-to-service calls to dependencies automatically are traced.
Fantastic.
So it's just, that's why you pick Dapr. It's like that work is built in. You can customize it. That's where more code and config might come in. But, this is what you get out of the box.
Awesome. So where can people go today to get, start in the community, get started with Dapr?
Great question. What I would do, I would go to just Dapr.io. I think that's the easiest place to start. You mentioned community. There's really a vibrant community around Dapr. You can see how the governance works, but there's so many things like discussions going on very lively in Discord. There's Twitter, there's blogs, there's community meetings that happen a few times a month. They're kind of global, like in different parts of the world. They're kind of globally friendly. So just lots of ways to get involved with the community here. And then everything I showed you and tons more are available through the docs. And if you want kind of a shortcut, I'd recommend do the getting started. It gets you going with a CLI. And then there's a number of quick starts. Pretty much every API now has a quick start. If you just want to, kind of take things for a ride. And then the docs go further, like how do you really use this, on day 20 in production. So it's not all kind of hello world. It goes pretty far.
Wow, that was a lot of really, really cool ways to get up and running with microservice development. Thank you so much for joining today and
thanks,
talking a lot about Dapr. I had a lot of fun seeing all the really cool demos.
Thanks a bunch.